Adam Smith's The Wealth of Nations is one of the most influential works in the history of economics, laying the foundation for classical economic thought and shaping the way people understand capitalism, markets, and trade to this day. Published in 1776, during the height of the Enlightenment and on the eve of industrial transformation, the book is a sweeping exploration of how economies function when individuals are left to pursue their own interests within a system governed by certain moral and legal constraints. Smith argues that economic prosperity is best achieved not through heavy state control, but through a system where individuals are free to produce, trade, and consume as they see fit. At the heart of Smith's argument is the idea that individuals, by acting in their own self-interest, unintentionally contribute to the overall good of society. He famously describes this as the invisible hand, a metaphor for how private motives can lead to socially beneficial outcomes without anyone deliberately working toward that goal. This doesn't mean Smith believed greed was good or that markets were flawless. He believed self-interest must operate within a framework of justice and institutional integrity. For him, a fair and functioning society required laws, education, and moral behavior, not just free markets. Smith opens the book by discussing the division of labor, using the now famous example of a pin factory. He shows how breaking down production into specialized tasks dramatically increases productivity. This principle, according to Smith, is the key to growing wealth in any society. As labor becomes more specialized, efficiency increases, which leads to greater output and more opportunities for trade. He also points out that the extent of this division of labor depends on the size of the market. Small, isolated economies can't benefit as much because they lack enough demand to support specialization. Money and trade emerge as natural outgrowths of this division of labor. Smith explains how bartering evolves into the use of money, allowing for more complex economic exchange. He describes how value is determined not only by labor, but also by supply and demand over time, offering early insights into pricing mechanisms. While his labor theory of value would later be debated and revised by economists like Ricardo and Marx, Smith's approach laid important groundwork for understanding market dynamics. Smith also delves into the role of capital and investment in driving economic development. He notes that wealth accumulates when individuals save and reinvest their profits into production. This accumulation of capital allows businesses to expand, adopt new technologies, and hire more workers. He distinguishes between productive labor, which generates goods and services for sale, and unproductive labor, which does not directly contribute to national income. This distinction is controversial by today's standards, but it was an attempt to explain why some activities generated more visible economic returns than others. Government, for Smith, has three main responsibilities: to protect society from invasion, defense, to administer justice, law enforcement, and to build and maintain public infrastructure, like roads and bridges, that private enterprise would not invest in due to lack of immediate profit. He does not argue for a completely hands-off government, as some modern interpretations suggest. Instead, he calls for a limited but active state that creates the conditions for markets to function, especially in areas like education, legal protection, and national defense. International trade is another major focus of the book. Smith strongly critiques the dominant economic ideology of his time, mercantilism, which held that national wealth was measured by hoarded gold and silver and that governments should tightly control trade to maintain a favorable balance. Smith flips this logic on its head by arguing that wealth lies in the capacity to produce and trade goods, not in stockpiles of treasure. He champions free trade and the idea that both parties in a transaction can benefit. His theory of absolute advantage explains how different countries should specialize in producing what they're best at, and trade for the rest. One of the book's strengths is Smith's awareness of the limitations and dangers within the capitalist system. He warns against monopolies, excessive corporate power, and the collusion of businessmen who might act against the public interest. He also recognizes that unchecked markets can lead to inequality and hardship, particularly for workers. Though he believes in free enterprise, he also calls for social responsibility and moral standards to temper economic ambition. The tone of the book is both analytical and philosophical. Smith was not just an economist but a moral philosopher, and The Wealth of Nations is filled with reflections on ethics, human nature, and the obligations of society. He saw economic life as inseparable from the broader moral framework of a just and stable community. His economic theories were not intended to justify greed or exploitative behavior, but to explore how society could harness human ambition for the common good. Smith's influence was profound. His arguments laid the groundwork for future economists, including David Ricardo, John Stuart Mill, and eventually Karl Marx, who both built upon and challenged Smith's ideas. The book also provided intellectual support for the rise of capitalism in the 19th century, offering a vision of a self-regulating market that became central to liberal economic policy for generations. His ideas still underpin modern arguments about free markets, competition, and the limits of state intervention. Despite its historical context, many of Smith's insights remain startlingly relevant today. Issues like income inequality, globalization, corporate power, and the role of government are all questions he wrestled with in the 18th century. His nuanced understanding of economics as both a technical and moral discipline stands in contrast to the sometimes narrow, mathematical approach of modern economics. In that way, Smith's work continues to offer rich food for thought, not just for economists, but for anyone interested in how society functions. The book is long and at times dense, especially for modern readers, but it rewards careful study. Smith moves fluidly between theory, history, and observation, drawing on examples from agriculture, manufacturing, and global trade. He writes with a clarity and precision that reveal the depth of his thinking, even if the language reflects the style of his time. For readers willing to engage with it, the book opens up a window into the birth of modern economics and the philosophical debates that continue to shape our world. Over time, The Wealth of Nations has become more than a book, it's a foundational text in the canon of Western thought. It represents a turning point in how people understand wealth, power, and human behavior. Smith challenged the prevailing wisdom of his time and offered a new framework that emphasized cooperation through exchange, trust in systems, and the importance of incentives. He was hopeful about humanity's capacity to improve its condition through rational policy and ethical self-interest. Importantly, Smith did not see markets as magical or infallible. He saw them as tools, complex, powerful, but in need of guidance. His vision of capitalism was not devoid of empathy, it was deeply grounded in moral philosophy and a belief that economic prosperity should enhance human well-being. His ideas paved the way for a more dynamic, open, and interconnected world, but he also acknowledged that economic systems could only flourish if society remained vigilant, ethical, and committed to justice.